Good afternoon. I'm here at the G20 with one purpose, and that is to deliver for the British people. As a country, we're facing outward to the world once again, reviving the international influence that was neglected for years, rebuilding partnerships and using them to deliver on the things that matter at home: investment, growth and security. Because we can only make lives better for working people if we're prepared to shape the global problems that are reaching into our lives more and more. The G20 represents 85% of global GDP. So we have a shared interest here in driving up growth and investment, and a profound responsibility to find solutions for the problems facing the world today: climate change, poverty and hunger. And we made real progress. I was pleased to back President Lula's Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty to end the years of stagnation in the fight against poverty, because this is also an investment in stability and in tackling the factors that force people to leave their homes and make the long journeys that can end with criminal gangs exploiting them and putting their lives at risk in the English Channel. We will smash those gangs, but we will also work with others to address the root causes of the problem. And that's why here at the G20 meeting, we're building on our leadership in tackling climate change. And later this afternoon, we are launching our Global Clean Power Alliance, together with Brazil and other partners, to accelerate the clean energy transition, to cut energy bills, boost energy security, and reduce emissions around the world. We also made significant progress here in our bilateral discussions. With President Lula, we talked about our shared passions, football, of course, but also workers' rights, and our shared desire to grow the £11 billion trading relationship between our two countries. As a statement of intent, I'm pleased to say that we have agreed that all future Brazilian sovereign bonds will be listed on the London Stock Exchange, showing once again the gravitational pull of the City of London. I also welcome new investments from Mexico and from Chile, including into battery recycling technology, which will create 750 new jobs in the United Kingdom. And with Prime Minister Modi, I discussed how we could deepen the unique ties between our two countries. We agreed to take forward an ambitious new UK-India comprehensive strategic partnership covering key issues like security, technology, climate, health and education. And starting with trade and investment, we therefore agreed to relaunch the FTA negotiations in the new year. With the Prime Ministers of Italy and Japan, I discussed how we can take forward our Global Combat Air Programme to build the next generation of fighter jets, boost our industrial capacity and strengthen our national security for the long term. We looked ahead to the establishment of a new GCAP headquarters, which is due to be based in the UK, creating hundreds of jobs. Finally, I met with President Xi. This was the first leader-level meeting between the United Kingdom and China for 6 years. We had frank, constructive and pragmatic discussions. As G20 economies and permanent members of the Security Council, and at a time of huge volatility, I think we both recognised the importance of engagement. I was clear that we will always act in our national interest, and that we have a shared responsibility to work together on challenges like climate change and delivering growth. So we agreed to a new dialogue on those issues. Of course, there will continue to be areas where we don't agree, including their support for Russia's war and on Hong Kong. But here too, we need to engage. The lesson of history is that the more we're able to deal with problems, the world is safer when leaders talk. We also agreed to keep this channel of communication open. And under my leadership, Britain will never be absent from the world table. We will work with partners across the G20, but one nation stands apart. For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine. And in this moment, when global challenges are affecting us at home, I take the view more than ever that British leadership matters. So for the sake of our economic growth and our national security, we will keep stepping up on the international stage, delivering results as we have done here at the G20, and making our presence felt. Thank you. Now I'll take some questions, and I think I'm starting with Ollie at the Times. Ollie.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ahead of this summit, you said that you wanted the G20 to double down on its support for Ukraine, but the final communique actually waters down previously agreed commitments by the G20. How disappointed are you by this?
Well, the communique does be absolutely clear about the UN Charter and sovereignty and territorial integrity, and obviously that's negotiated by quite a sort of diverse group. But as for the G20 and me doubling down, I used every opportunity, both in the main sessions, and I'm on the record for my clear position on Ukraine and what we need to do to double down, but also in the very many bilateral meetings that I've had with other country and other leaders here. And of course, there was a G7 statement last Friday that went out. Thank you. Richard at the Eye.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Say that again.
Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin. Michael.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Why is your Rural Affairs Minister suggesting that farmers can avoid paying inheritance tax if they plan properly, hurting British farmers?
Look, on the question of farming, I think it's important I just restate that firstly, £5 billion was set aside in the budget over the next 2 years for farming. That is the single biggest amount of money into farming and sustainable food production that has ever been set aside in any budget ever. So that's a real statement of intent in terms of supporting farmers. There's also money to deal with flooding, which is a huge problem for farmers, and money to deal with the outbreak of disease, which can be catastrophic for farmers if they lose their livestock. On the question of inheritance tax, the example I've given is a typical example of parents wanting to pass on a farm to one of their children. And in those cases, when you look at all the thresholds available, that means that only farms over the value of £3 million will be affected by the changes, and therefore the vast majority of farms will be unaffected. And those that are affected will only pay half the inheritance tax that other people pay, 20%, and they will have a 10-year period over which to pay it. And so that's why I'm very confident in saying that the vast majority will not be affected. How farmers then arrange their affairs within their family is obviously a matter for them. Thank you. I've got David at the Mirror.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the government's own impact assessment suggests another 300,000 pensioners will be in absolute poverty and another 450,000 in relative poverty by 2030 as a result of the winter fuel payments cuts. How do you justify this, and how damaging is it that Scottish Labour have said that they'd reverse it?
In that analysis, I think it's important for me to point out what was left out of account in that analysis. The first is the considerable uptake in pension credit. Was not accounted for in those figures. We've had a campaign, as you know, to drive up pension credit, to get more pensioners onto pension credit, which obviously is not only a guarantee of the winter fuel allowance, but also gives the credit itself. So there's an additional benefit there. It leaves out of account the household support fund, which, as you know, in the budget was then extended. And it leaves out of account the warm homes discount. And, of course, on top of that, as we now know, the figure for the increase in state pensions for next year under the triple lock, because we've stabilised the economy, is about £470. And, therefore, pensioners will be better off because we've stabilised the economy. So far as Scotland is concerned, you know, that's one of the features of devolution. There are not infrequently different approaches taken in different nations across the United Kingdom. Thank you very much. Can I go to Jason at the Mail?
Thanks, Pim. I'll let you get your pen.
No, look, I always come prepared, just like that cagoule
we'll make a journalist out of you,
at the Olympics.
Listen, you've talked a lot about protecting people's payslips in the budget, but it's becoming clear that thousands of people are going to lose their payslips altogether as a result of some of those national insurance hikes. The big retailers today are saying job cuts are inevitable. The Bank of England governor says that they're right, and actually the figure could be much higher than the 50,000 predicted by the OBR. What's your message to those working people who are going to lose their livelihoods as a result of the budget? Is that just the sort of necessary price for fixing the foundations?
Well, look, we took a number of difficult decisions in the budget and ensured that the pay slip in people's pockets is not affected. They will not be paying more, and they'll see that month on month in their pay slip. So far as the numbers affected, I mean, it is important, I think, to factor in the protection that we've put in place for employers, particularly small employers. So half of employers will either see no change to their NICs or they'll be paying less. And that is important because that's the difference we made by the changes we made to the employment allowance. So half of employers, as I say, no change or cuts to NICs. But look, we took difficult decisions, but fair decisions to stabilise the economy and to make sure that we could put ourselves in a position where we could make very important investment then into our NHS, into our schools and into housing. Thank you. George, the FT.
Yeah, George Parker from the FT. You mentioned Hong Kong and China in your introductory remarks, and as you know, Prime Minister, dozens of lawyers, academics, journalists, pro-democracy activists have just been jailed for alleged subversion in Hong Kong. Will you condemn that in the strongest possible terms, or will you now have to bite your tongue as you've tried to forge this closer economic partnership with China?
Well, we want that closer economic partnership, and China is the second biggest economy in the world, and therefore I see that as an area where we can cooperate. But I do also think it's right that where we have differences, we have a frank discussion about them, as we did yesterday in relation to Hong Kong. So I do think both of those things need to happen, but what we mustn't lose is the opportunity for our economy with a better partnership when it comes to cooperating on economic and trade affairs. But as I say, that doesn't mean we don't have our differences, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be frank about those differences. And that's the approach that I took yesterday and will continue to take. Thank you. Martina.
Thank you. Martina Bett from The Sun. Prime Minister, Peter Mandelson, who's widely expected to become your next US ambassador, said that you should end your feud with Elon Musk and that you should use Nigel Farage to help build bridges with the incoming Donald Trump administration. Will you listen to his advice?
Well, I make no comment about appointments. In relation to relations with the US, obviously it's an important relationship for us. Historically, the US-UK relationship has been a special relationship for a reason, forged in difficult circumstances, and as important today as it's ever been. And that is, in forging that relationship, I've obviously spent time with President-elect Trump back in September when I was in New York, and we had dinner together, and then spoken to him on the phone. And I think that's right in terms of building the relationship as we go forward. Thank you. Caitlin.
Thanks, Prime Minister. There are warnings about job cuts over your changes to NICs. There are farmers protesting in Westminster over inheritance tax, and there are warnings about pensioner poverty due to the winter fuel changes. Do you still have confidence in your financial plans and, by extension, Rachel Reeves?
Absolutely. We had to stabilise the economy. We had to deal with the 22 billion black hole, and we needed to invest in the future of our country. And the reason we got into such a mess for the last 14 years is because the last government refused to take a single difficult decision. And you saw at PMQs just 6 days ago, they're still in the same camp. So they are still saying, we want all the benefits. You heard the Leader of the Opposition. She wants the investment into the health service. She wants the investment into education. She wants the investment into housing. But she doesn't want to raise any of the money to pay for it. That's exactly why we got into the problem in the first place. Unfunded commitments. We've ended that. We've turned a page. And the best evidence of that is the investment that is now coming into this country in a way it wasn't coming in for the last 14 years. So I'm much more interested in those people who are putting their hand in their pocket, the global investors, and saying now is the time to invest in the United Kingdom, and we're going to do so, because I think that'll be really important for our economy, than I am by the detractors who want us to go back to the fiction that we've been through for 14 years. It's that fiction that got us into the problem in the first place. Thank you. Jess at The Guardian.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Jessica Elgott from The Guardian. Jeremy Clarkson's been at this protest in Whitehall with the farmers, and he says that 96% of farmers will be affected by this tax change, and he asked the crowd to raise their hand if they were affected, and almost everybody did. Firstly, is that true, or is he spreading misinformation, and are you worried that powerful, famous voices are spreading misinformation about this policy?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the business of commenting on what Jeremy Clarkson says. I think the facts speak for themselves. As I've said on a number of occasions, for a typical family wanting to pass on through the family, which is a typical case, completely understood, then with all the allowances in place, to pass it on to a child, it's a £3 million threshold. And all of you can check out what that means in terms of the impact. I think the BBC has already done it. But it means that the vast majority of farms are unaffected by this. And I think it's just important that we keep making that clear, but also making clear the huge investment that we are putting into farming, the £5 billion for food sustainability, and the money on flooding and the money on diseases. But in a sense, we need to keep communicating our message, but the figures are there. Nobody's disputing the £3 million figure for a typical case. And once that figure is there, then it's very clear. You can look through the previous claims for relief and work out that the vast majority of farmers are not going to be affected by this change at all. Thank you all very much. Thank you.